And when you click that, then you'll get a list of the languages. Okay? And you can click however many of the languages you want to support localizing this string file for, and then in your file navigator you'll see a .strings file for every language. You can click on it, and then usually what you'll do is you'll click on it and you'll see hello equals hello. You'll take that entire file, or all the strings files, ship them off to a localizer, maybe with a demo of your app or something like that. They'll translate all the strings and send them back, and then you just plop them in to your Xcode project and ship it. Okay? So the way that these bundles are arranged is inside a bundle, and your application is the main bundle, so that's the top level of your application. Inside are these lproj directories. And the name of the lproj directory is like a little two-letter symbol for the language. So there's en.lproj, that's English. There's fr.lproj, that's French. And inside the lproj is all the strings files for localizing to that language. Okay, it's as simple as that. So you might have, 25 .lprojes. If you support 25 languages, in all of them there'll be a copy of the strings files that are edited. You can look more about NSBundle offline, but there are ways to also associate string files, not just with your main bundle of your app, but if you had a framework or something else, you could associate it with frameworks, because bundle, in addition to main bundle, it has this bundle for class method. Okay, and so it knows where that class came from, whether it was a framework or your main bundle, and it'll give you the bundle, and then you can get a path for a resource or do localized string for key value table. Okay, a couple of things about debugging localization. There's a really nice user default that you can set, ns show non-localized strings, and every time one of those ns localized string, I say methods, but really they're macros. Anytime one of those does not find an entry in a string file, you'll get a little log. Okay, so then you'll know that your localizer missed one. Okay, so that's important to know. So that way you can, when you're doing your QA of your localizations, to make sure that they're really working. It's good. I've seen some people complain that sometimes they'll add some strings to a localization and test it, and it's like, oh, it's not getting the new changes. I haven't seen that in iOS 7, but if you do, building clean and reinstalling seems to solve that problem. I don't know exactly the circumstances that supposedly happens under, but can't hurt to build clean. Okay, so that's strings, and we'll see all this happening in the demo. There's more to localization, though, than just strings, unfortunately. There's also the concept of a locale. So your user not only might speak a different language, they might live in any number of different locales. An easy one to think about is English. In America, we speak English. In Great Britain, they speak English. But there are local idioms, and the way that we express currency, the way we even just express numbers, big numbers, the commas and the periods are swapped, for example. Things just are all slightly different. So even though the language in both of those countries would be English, the locales would be different. So there's a whole other system here for locales. And users set their language and their locale using the settings app, and your application is just supposed to adapt. Okay? And you adapt by using some of these methods that take a locale as an argument, or that use a locale under the covers. Okay? You can find out what your current locale is with these methods, and you can also have this nice auto-updating current locale, which if the user changes their locale, it'll just automatically update underneath the covers. Although if you probably want to listen to this radio station too, because if it changes, you might have to redraw your UI, right? If they change. But it's pretty unusual for the user to change their locale or their language while they're in the middle of running your app, but it could happen. Okay, you should be prepared for that to happen. So what are some of the things that are different in a locale? Well, there's numbers. Now, there's a lot going on with formatting numbers. It seems like it's really simple, but there's actually a lot to think about here. But I'm going to look at two pretty simple cases. One is displaying numbers, and one is reading numbers. So for displaying numbers on screen, you probably want to do string with format %G. %G just means generic floating point number. But you don't want to do that, okay? What you want to use is this method in NSNumber formatter called localized string from number style, okay? And there's different number styles like decimal and spell out. We'll even spell it out. Like you put a 4 in there, it'll say 4, F-O-U-R. Okay, spell it out. So there's different formats for doing that. And that'll give you back a string that you can put in the UI that will display the number in a way that's appropriate for the locale you're in. And especially, again, a large number like 1,000 in the US might be 1,000.00, whereas in Great Britain it'd be 1,000,000,00. Okay, and so this would get that right. Then there's parsing numbers, reading them. You really probably want here to just say int value or float value of a string, which will parse it and try to interpret a float or an int as the input. But that's not really the right way to do it. You should use the number formatter here. So you just create a formatter, set the style of number that you're trying to read in, same thing as we saw above there. And then you're going to get the parsed number as an NS number by calling number from string. Okay, and that's going to look in that string, parse it as that kind of like a currency or just a decimal number. And so if the person types in 1,000,000,00, you'll get 1,000 if they're in the Great Britain locale. Make sense? Whereas in the US, you wouldn't get that. 1,000,000 would probably give you 1, or might even give you 0 because that's not really, or nil because it's not really even a number. Dates, another complicated one you have to be careful of. All I'm going to say about dates is familiarize with yourself with the concept that our calendar, the Gregorian calendar, is not the only calendar in the world. Okay, there are other calendars out there, and there's mechanism in iOS for dealing with all of them, but you have to know how to do it. I can't cover it all in one lecture, even if I had a whole lecture devoted to it probably. But you want to look at classes like NS Calendar, search through documentation, kind of familiarize yourself. If you're really going to do a multi-language, multi-locale application, and dates are part of your UI, you really want to understand what you're doing there. Okay. For formatting simple dates, there's this nice method, localized string from date with a date style. You can get away with a lot by just using this one. Okay. But if you're doing anything more complicated with dates, like you're writing the calendar app or something, then you obviously want to really understand dates better. Strings, an interesting thing, if you're searching in a string, okay, especially if you're searching case insensitively to try and find a word in a string, you don't want to use the range of string method. You want to use this range of string method, range of string options, range locale, and pass the current locale. And this is especially true with case insensitivity and when diacritics are involved, because different languages treat the diacritics differently, okay, and case sensitivity is different in different languages. So you would definitely want to use this method for that. UI image is kind of an interesting one. What if you're writing an app, some kind of driving app or something like that, and you have a stop sign? The stop sign is pretty much the same in almost all locales, so you're good to go. But other signs, like yield signs and things like that, can be quite different, and your user wouldn't even recognize a yield sign in their locale. So you might want to have a different image and have the image be localizable. Okay? Really easy to do. You just put the image for each locale in its LProj, for the languages, in its LProj, and then you pull it out. But even there, if you have a language that might have different locales that have a different sign with the same language on it, amazingly, stop is stop in most languages, even though stop is obviously not a word in French. If you go to France, you'll see stop signs that say stop, which is kind of strange. But there might be locales where things are different, so you might have to do a little extra work on top of UI image named, okay? You might have to say, oh, if I'm in this locale, then it looks like this. Now, again, that's only if you're doing an application that has imagery, like road signs or whatever, that's very locale specific. Okay, that's something a localizer will hopefully help you, right? You'll put a yield sign up and they'll say, oh, wait a second, in, I don't know, Sweden, that looks different, or, in Afghanistan, it's this. And so your localizers hopefully help you. But UI image named will look in the LProjs for you. Okay, but you might still have to do locale on top of that. So the demo we're going to do here is internationalizing Photomania. So I'm going to start with the Photomania that we had at our last lecture last week. So here's Photomania. And Photomania's UI here, it's amazing. It's actually pretty easy to localize because Photomania, primarily what it displays is its content, right? If you look at almost all of this UI, it's just only displaying what's coming back from Flickr. It hardly has any other text in it. That's actually very good UI design. Generally, you want as high a percentage of the UI to be what you're displaying. So if you're a photo viewing app, you would want photo everywhere and just a little bit of controls around the edges. But there is a couple of places. You can see this guy right here. Has quite a few strings in it right there. And there's some miscellaneous strings that we load up as part of these prototype cells that might be, need to be localizable. But let's start, like I said, with adding the ability to have these other languages. And we do that by clicking here to edit our project. But again, we don't want to be editing the target. We want to edit this. So this is something right here. Don't forget this step right here. We want the project. And when we do that, now you'll see there's localization. Here's the localizations down here. And we are going to use base localization, which means our storyboard is going to be our base. And we're going to modify the strings after that. So I'm going to add French. So let's add French. It's asking me, what existing stuff do you want to make strings files for? And I'm just going to say all of it, all my storyboards, and don't worry too much about info plist.strings. There's a little bit in there to localize, like your app name can actually be localized, but most of your stuff is in your storyboard. So we'll have both storyboards. And when we do that, it just adds French here. And if we look up here, look at this. Now this has a little triangle that if we click it, we get to see that there's the base storyboard, and now there's strings files for French. Okay, so here's what a strings file looks like. It's got a comment to the localizer, and then a key, and then a value. Okay, now these keys right here, how do we know what matches up with what? Well, most of the time we can look at the value like done. Well, we know the done is this done button, easy. But look at title. See, there's 3 titles. There's a title right here, and there's 2 titles right here. It's like, which title is which? Which is this, and which is this title right here, for example. And you can find that out by clicking on any of the titles. Like, let's click on this one, because we do definitely want to localize this one. Go over to the inspector. Go to the identity inspector. It's part of its identity. And you can see that all objects have an object ID in a storyboard. See that? So this one's 65EYS hit. So that is this one. Okay, so this one is the title that is the title of that thing. Now these other 2 titles, we don't even need to localize them because they are in these prototypes here. Okay, these 2 prototypes, so they never appear in the UI, right? These titles and subtitles, we always drive them with whatever our data source is for our table view. But this one we do need to localize. And then also this little subtitle one here too, which is QCJ, this one also needs to be localized. So what does it look like to localize this? Let's say I'm a localizer and I'm localizing it. Unfortunately, I don't quite know enough French to localize this, so I'm going to show you a kind of a cool way to localize, which is good for testing, which is just to put a period in between every letter, like that. Okay, so do a localization like this as a developer, because it's easy for you to do. Okay, you don't have to know the language. And what's cool about this is it makes everything wide. So it's going to really challenge your UI to make things fit when you change these strings, right? It might even work for German if you do this, because German tends to be very long words. And it's also, again, really you can do it really quickly. Well, let's go ahead and localize this entire file by doing this. Oops. And another good thing about this is everywhere in the UI that this appears, it's going to be really obvious immediately. Oh, oops, I forgot that one, right? Because this periods is very, very easy to see in the UI. So we don't need to do these 2 titles or this subtitle. We don't need to do this because that's just a placeholder. We want this subtitle down here though, because that's